When I hear a black person say that Christianity was the white man's religion that was forced on our ancestors, in some cases, that is true, but that's not in every case. And we look right here, and we know that Christianity started in Israel, particularly in Jerusalem during Shabbat, Passover. I mean, not Passover, the Feast of Days, which is known as Pentecost. And of course, you have the apostles spreading the gospel all the way down to places like Egypt, all the way down to Ethiopia, where it's rumored that Mark was unalived. Then, of course, you had it spreading all the way over to India, Iran, India. So the gospel in its infancy was all over the place. Places like Asia Minor, Turkey, Rome. So the gospel was spreading. But what I find it hard to believe, right? So in the book of Acts, the apostle Paul was mistaken for being an Egyptian. Now you can't convince me that all of these people over here in the Middle East, which is, we call it the Middle East, but ancient times, these were Europeans, these were Caucasians, these were people from the Caucasus Mountain, these were Slavic people. No, these were melanated people who look like me, or probably shades a little lighter. But when they hid Jesus, from King Herod, they had to go flee to Egypt, right? So how can you hide a Caucasian baby in the land of Egypt? But I digress. But if Christianity is the so-called white man's religion, right, and it started in Jerusalem, you have the gospel that spread it to these Eastern nations, which is now known as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Midian, in its infancy, right? So, and then of course it's spread it to Rome, but Rome was a polytheistic nation. So, and of course, because during that time of the Roman Empire, Roman had garrisons and different setups. So they were running, there's different from how traditional, people of conquest would, defeat nations and conquer them and enslave them. But instead they set rulers over these regions to, expand the Roman Empire, blah, blah, blah. And of course, you have the Apostle Paul's voyage, when he made his journeys through these places, because he was the apostle to the Gentiles, non-Israelites. And the gospel, spread it in his voyage. And then, then you have his first voyage, which was a little, shorter in region versus his second journey, which he kind of like expanded a little bit more. But I don't understand how Christianity is the white man's religion, forced on our ancestors in some cases when Christianity had spread it in these eastern regions. Then you had Christianity that spread it from places like Egypt, and then during Mansa Musa, you had like a little small portions of Christianity, in West Africa. And this is, like even like prior of the Islamic conquest. So, and then of course, then you have Ethiopia, different regions where Christianity was in the first 5 centuries, and you have places like the Congolese, and there's different places where Christianity was. It has historically Christian presence prior to colonialism, prior to the transatlantic slave trade, prior to the trans-Saharan slave trade. So when I hear black people say that Christianity is the white man's religion and it was forced on our ancestors, and I'm not saying that there wasn't forced conversions, but to say that they owned it's preposterous to me. Especially when you have historic documents of early church fathers who were African and Egyptian, who had strong Christian presence. So when it comes to the so-called Christianity being the so-called white man's religion, you can't deny it. Like, you can't deny this. You can't deny his historical documents, the historical timelines of the early church fathers being African and Egyptian. There was a strong African Christian presence in the early centuries of Christianity. And you have these black people, Hebrew Israelites, and these black identity cult groups who will act like none of this is real. This is all conspiracy. And when you show them stuff like this, they get all mad. They get in their feelings because they rather hold on to a propaganda than actually do research. But, I understand you like to give the white man all the credit. White man, everything.
So he's Alpha and Omega. That if that's your propaganda and you want to stick to that, then woe unto you. Woe unto you. Well, the last time I checked, Christianity started in Jerusalem. Grace and peace.